The man they stop believing in is the only one at the table who knows exactly what he is about to become. 50s, maybe older, no inheritance, no name that opens rooms, no hand guiding him upward. He built nothing on the schedule the world agreed he was supposed to build on. Somewhere along the way, everyone who wished him well quietly decided his story was already written. You know how that decision looks on a face. You felt the weight of being written off by people too polite to say it. Relatives changing the subject, friends who stopped inviting you, the cold clarity of being sorted into the category of those who didn't make it in time. Here's what none of them understand. What no one helped you build, no one can take. A man with nothing to protect has nothing to fear. You were sold a lie so old, nobody questions it. That support is an advantage. That mentors, inheritances, connections put men ahead. On the surface, yes. Underneath, the truth is closer to the opposite. The ones handed power never learn to wield it. The ones who inherit a network never learn to build one from silence. When the game gets serious, the man who was never carried is the only one who knows how to walk. They got you backwards. The exact conditions they pitied you for were quietly manufacturing something they will not be able to compete with. Machiavelli wasn't moralizing. He was observing the sequence of power. Real force is built from the ground by a man who spent his earliest phase learning only to survive attack. The defended man never develops the second capacity. He's still stuck in phase 1 at 50, 60, 70 and doesn't know it. You finished that phase decades ago. You just thought it was punishment. This is what almost nobody says, because it disrupts the entire mythology. The culture rewards visible success on a specific timeline. Foundation in your 20s, building in your 30s, arrival by 40. Any man outside that shape is quietly treated as a failure. What that culture never mentions is that the timeline is a marketing schedule built to produce predictable consumers. The late bloomer isn't a defective early bloomer. He's a different species, forged under conditions that build a self no career can destroy. Those are not the same achievement. Here's what I'm going to hand you: the specific mechanisms by which the absence of support has been secretly forging capacities the supported man will never have. Why Machiavelli concluded fortune favors a particular kind of man, almost never the one everyone was betting on. The interior architecture of the late arriver, so you can see with cold clarity what's actually been happening while everyone thought nothing was. And near the end, the one strategic insight that separates the late bloomer who takes his revenge from the one who dies waiting. That distinction is where almost every man in your position loses the plot. You will not. If these ideas resonate, hit subscribe for more top-tier content. Drop late and loaded in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Understand exactly what has been happening to you while they were not watching. The absence of support in your life did not remove something from you. It installed something. And the installation happened so slowly, so quietly, and under such uncomfortable conditions that almost no one who goes through it recognizes what is being built until decades later, when they finally look up and notice that the man who once seemed behind has become something the men in front no longer know how to compete with. Consider the specific texture of your years. You had to figure out things that other men had explained to them. You had to interpret rooms that other men were introduced to. You had to build instincts because you did not have instructions. Every time you walked into a situation with no map, your nervous system was writing one. Every time you were misjudged and had to sit with the misjudgment because no one was going to correct it for you, your interior developed a specific density that comfort never produces. Every time you watched a less capable man advance past you because he had the right last name, the right introduction, the right father, Something in you sharpened that most men never have reason to sharpen. You develop the observer, you develop the analyst, you develop the strategist, not because you chose to, because the environment gave you no other survival option. Now look at the man who had support. Really look at him. He learned the rules of a game that was designed to keep him comfortable. He learned to move through predictable channels. He learned to trust that the ground under him would remain the ground. His confidence, which you may have envied for years, is not really confidence. It is unbroken habit. He has never had to construct certainty out of nothing because certainty was handed to him at every stage. And this is the part almost no one sees. When the ground under him shifts, and eventually it always does, he does not have the instrument you have. He does not have the eye that reads a room in 3 seconds because that eye was never developed. He does not have the internal calm that comes from having survived being written off because he has never been written off. He is fluent in a language that only works when the world is kind. You are fluent in a language that works when the world is exactly what it actually is. That fluency is not visible on a resume. It is not visible in a title. It is not visible in the small talk at the family gathering where your cousin's promotion is being celebrated. It is visible only in the specific situations where the game gets real, and the game always eventually gets real. When it does, the supported man scrambles. You do not. Because for you, real has been the entire climate of your life. Remember, the blade of solitude. Here is the second capacity that has been forming in you without your permission, the capacity to be alone without disintegrating. Most men cannot do this. Most men, deprived of external validation for even a few weeks, begin to unravel. They need the meeting, the group, the constant stream of confirmation that their existence is registering somewhere. They mistake this need for social intelligence. It is not social intelligence, it is dependency dressed up in a suit. You would not know this from the outside, but the man who requires an audience to feel real is the man who can be moved by anyone who controls the audience. He is not sovereign. He is a citizen of other people's opinions of him. You have been trained brutally and without your consent in the exact opposite condition. You have had long stretches of your life in which no one was cheering, no one was checking in, no one was noticing whether you got out of bed. And you got out of bed anyway, you worked anyway, you kept your mind moving anyway. That is not a small thing. That is not a footnote in your biography. That is a rare and terrifying capacity, and Machiavelli would have recognized it instantly. He wrote at length about the specific danger of the man who does not need approval to act. Such a man cannot be flattered into compliance. Such a man cannot be threatened with exclusion because exclusion is a climate he has already survived. Such a man cannot be bought with the small currencies that keep other men in line because he has learned to live without the small currencies. The men who have always had support have never had to develop this. Their solitude tolerance is low and they do not know it because they have never been forced to measure it. Put them in a season of quiet. Cut the constant stream of professional validation. Remove the network for 6 months and watch what happens. Most of them experience it as a kind of vertigo they cannot describe. They call it burnout. They call it depression. Sometimes it is. But often underneath, it is something simpler. It is the first time in their lives they have had to be alone with themselves, and they discover they do not have the instrument. You have the instrument. You have been holding it for so long, you have stopped noticing its weight. And this is where the shame cycles in, so let me address it directly. Part of you right now is doing the math. Part of you is counting the years the instrument cost you. Part of you is grieving what the solitude took while it was giving. That grief is real. Do not minimize it, but also do not misread it. The years were not wasted. The years were tuition. What you paid for is not visible on the outside because it is not the kind of thing that shows up in the visible. It shows up in the interior, and the interior is what actually runs a man's life once he stops trying to run it for other people. You have not been behind. You have been paying for something they cannot afford. There is a specific story your culture has told you about the shape of a man's life. Foundation early, building through the middle, arrival by a certain age, or the whole thing was a failure. That story is not a description. It is a marketing structure. It exists to sell products to men at each stage of the sequence. Education, career optimization, family formation, home ownership, retirement instruments. Every stage has an industry behind it, and every industry needs men to feel that the timeline is real and that missing it is a form of moral failure. This is not conspiracy. This is just how the system organizes attention and money, and the cost for men whose actual lives do not match the marketed sequence is a lifetime of quiet shame that was manufactured to sell things. Look at history, and you will notice something the timeline hides. The men who changed the most in their fields were often men whose curves were nothing like the marketed one. Some arrived at 40, some at 50, some at 70. Some spent decades apparently doing nothing, and then produced work in a burst that reorganized their entire domain. The timeline does not describe reality. It describes a preferred customer. And the preferred customer is not a man doing anything interesting. He is a man producing predictable revenue at predictable ages. If your life did not fit that template, the reason is not that you failed the template. The reason is that you were never going to be that customer in the first place. Machiavelli watched a specific pattern in Renaissance Italy. He watched princes who inherited power lose it again and again to men who had built theirs from nothing. He watched the ones with family names get outmaneuvered by the ones with only their wits. He was not romanticizing the underdog. He was documenting a mechanism. The mechanism is this: power that arrives with the blood is not fully understood by the one who wields it because he was never in the room where power was actually being generated. He inherited the finished object. He does not know how it was made. He does not know its brittle places. He does not know its leverage points. And so, when he encounters a man who has been in that room, who has watched power form and dissolve and reform under his own hands, the inheritor loses. Not always immediately, but eventually. Because knowledge of construction always defeats mere possession of the constructed thing. You have been in the room. That is what the timeline hid. That is what the culture called failure. That is what your family whispered about at Thanksgiving. You have been in the room where the object was being made, and while everyone else was congratulating each other on the objects they had been handed, you were learning the material at the level of its molecule. That knowledge is not visible. That knowledge is invisible until the moment it becomes decisive. Then it is the only thing in the room. Now here is where the frame flips. And I need you to hold on to something before I flip it, because the flip is not comfortable. Everything I have said so far, you may have heard some version of before. Late bloomers finish stronger. Struggle builds character. The unsupported man develops resilience. These are true, but they are also incomplete, and the incomplete version has become its own kind of cage. There are men who spend their entire lives collecting these ideas as consolation. They read the books, they highlight the passages, they repeat the maxims. And they never actually convert the interior tuition into external result. They stay in the forge. They never leave. Here is the harder truth. The forge does not automatically produce the blade. The forge produces the raw material. The blade requires an additional act, and most late bloomers never perform it. They confuse having been prepared with having arrived. They confuse the interior capacity with the exterior expression. They wait, sometimes for decades more, for someone to notice what they have built inside. no one is going to notice. That was never going to be the mechanism. The mechanism was always that the man who was forged in solitude must, at a specific moment, use what he has been building to act in the world, without asking permission and without waiting for the room to signal readiness. The men who die still waiting for their revenge are the men who kept believing that the recognition would come to them because it was owed. Recognition is not owed. Recognition is claimed, and it is claimed through an action or a series of actions that a man in your position is uniquely qualified to take precisely because he has been discounted for so long that he can move under a level of visibility that would sink a more watched man. This is the strategic gift of being written off. You are underestimated. Underestimation is a form of camouflage, and camouflage, in Machiavellian terms, is one of the most decisive positional advantages a man can hold. Most late bloomers waste this. They spend their energy trying to correct the underestimation. They argue with their families. They explain themselves at reunions. They try to make the ones who wrote them off understand that they were wrong. This is a mistake. You do not correct underestimation with argument. You correct it with result, silently, without warning, without preamble. The correction is not delivered in words. The correction is delivered in the fact of what you become while no one is looking. The man who explains himself has already lost the advantage of being underestimated. The man who says nothing and moves keeps the advantage until the moment he no longer needs it. And by then, it is too late for anyone to reclassify him. Not every man can hear this. Notice that you can. Notice that something in you has been waiting for someone to say exactly this without softening it. That is not a coincidence. That is the instrument recognizing its own use. Now the tactical layer. Because interior understanding without exterior application is a decoration, and you are not here for decoration. The first move is the withdrawal of your explanation from anyone who has already sorted you into the category of the ones who did not make it. Do not argue with the sorting. Do not attempt to update the sorting. Let the sorting stand. Every unit of energy you spend correcting the perception of the ones who wrote you off is a unit of energy that could have been spent building the reality that will eventually make their perception irrelevant. You are not going to convince them. You do not need to. The correction of their view of you is a byproduct of your work, not a goal of your work. The moment you make it a goal, you have handed them the leash again. Silence around your process is not secrecy for its own sake. Silence around your process is the strategic protection of a construction that cannot survive the constant interference of doubtful witnesses. Machiavelli understood this precisely. A prince announces his plans only when the plans are already in motion beyond the point of interference. Before that, the plans are private. Yours will be too. The second move is the ruthless audit of who currently has access to your future. Not your past, your future. There are people in your life who know only the version of you they wrote off, and they will continue to relate to that version regardless of what you become. Some of them are family, and you cannot remove them, but you can and must remove them from the specific conversations that concern what you are building. They do not get the updates, they do not get the plans, they do not get the vulnerable middle stage where a project is fragile and doubt is contagious. They get the finished object, if they get anything at all. This is not cruelty, this is elementary protection of the construction. A builder does not invite people who dislike the building into the site while the foundation is being poured. That would not be openness, that would be sabotage. The third move is the redefinition of what constitutes progress in your own mind. Because the marketed timeline has been running in your head for decades, you have been measuring your movement against a scale that was never yours. Discard it. The new scale is internal. Did you today do one thing that a man in his 20s, buoyed by a supportive network, could not have done because he lacked the interior instrument? If the answer is yes, that day counted. If the answer is no, tomorrow can count. This is not a soft reframe. This is the correct measurement. You are not competing on the timeline. You are competing on the depth of the instrument. And on that scale, the men you were told were ahead of you are, quietly and without knowing it, decades behind. The fourth move is the most Machiavellian, and I will name it plainly. Use the invisibility. As long as the culture reads you as the man whose story is over, you can move without the resistance that a more visible man would attract. The rooms you enter without being watched. The moves you make without being anticipated. The alliances you form without being scrutinized. This is a positional gift that supported men do not have. Their moves are watched from the beginning. Yours are not. Use the gap. Do not squander it by seeking attention prematurely. Attention will come when the object is complete. Until then, work under the cover of the underestimation you have been given for free. Now imagine 1 year forward. You wake in the same body, in the same room, but something structural has changed. The old ache of being written off has not disappeared, but it no longer directs your day. You are no longer negotiating with the ones who doubted you. You are no longer explaining. You are building quietly, with a clarity that other men in their 50s cannot access because they are still tangled in the approval of people whose approval will not survive them. You notice in small moments that people who once dismissed you have begun to look at you differently without being able to say why. There is a density in your presence that was not there a year ago. There is a gravity in your silence that unsettles rooms that used to overlook you. You do not announce anything. You do not need to. The construction is speaking for you now. Before we close, there is a deeper cut, and you have earned it. Everything I have said so far about the forge, about the blade, about the tactical moves, is still, in an important sense, about revenge. And the word revenge is honest to the emotion, which is why I have used it. But there is a layer beneath the revenge that separates the men who arrive and stay from the men who arrive and lose it again within a few years. The revenge is not the destination. The revenge is a fuel that gets you across a stretch of terrain that other fuels could not carry you across. Once you are across the terrain, if you continue to burn that fuel, it begins to consume the instrument it was carrying. Men who become obsessed with revenge as the end point arrive at the moment of victory and discover that the victory does not satisfy them because the audience they wanted to prove wrong has either moved on, died, or ceased to matter. The satisfaction they were hunting was always structurally impossible because the people they wanted to hear it were never really the point. The people they wanted to hear it were a stand-in for a deeper hunger that revenge cannot feed. That hunger is the hunger to be finally a full man on your own terms, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. The deepest form of the late bloomer's arrival is not the moment everyone finally sees. The deepest form is the moment you no longer need them to. The revenge, quietly, in the exact instant of its potential completion, becomes irrelevant. You have become the man they said you could not become, and the becoming itself is the reward. The applause, if it comes, is a footnote. And if it does not come, the arrival is not diminished. That is the specific, cold, complete freedom that only the man forged in the exact conditions you were forged in can access. The supported man cannot access it, because his identity is still tangled in the network that made him. The late bloomer can. This is the ultimate Machiavellian insight, and it is one Machiavelli himself only partially named. The one who does not need to be seen to know he has arrived is untouchable. Nothing can be taken from him, because everything he is now stands on ground that other people did not build and cannot demolish. That is the version of yourself you are walking toward. Not the version that finally impresses your family, not the version that finally corrects the ones who wrote you off. the version that no longer requires either. You will find, when you get there, that you are less angry than you expected to be, not because they were right, but because their opinion was never actually the axis on which your life was turning. It only seemed that way while you were still inside the forge. Once the blade is in your hand, the forge stops being the story. You are. If this landed the way I think it did, subscribe. Not because I asked, because you know now that you are engaged in a specific and rare construction, and you need a room where that construction is treated with the seriousness it deserves. What you have just heard is one layer. There is more. There is the deeper work of strategic detachment, the deeper work of applied Machiavellian principle, the deeper work of building a sovereign self in the exact life stage the culture told you was too late to build anything at all. This is the room where that work happens. Stay in it, and whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I'll see you there. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.